Good morning, everyone. So, it's raining a little bit today, but I shall persevere and hopefully it won't break my phone, because that would be sad, because then there will be no more videos. Nothing as dramatic as that. I'll make sure that I keep on making these silly little videos of mine, hopefully with less noise than what's in the background right now. But let's get on to it. So in this video I'm going to talk to you about APIs and web pages and the difference between the two. Basically, you may or may not have heard about APIs, and I'm pretty sure you've heard about web pages, but for at least some people who are not, full-time developers and kind of maybe just starting out, the difference may be a little bit subtle. Like why would you use one over the other, and like what are the considerations that you need to have, and what are the benefits and like the consequences. And it actually ties into a trend that I'm seeing today. Like, you may have heard about React and Angular and SPAs, or single page applications, and all that good stuff. And so I thought I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my experience with these different technologies, or these different approaches to solving problems, and just elaborate a little bit. Hopefully this will be educational to you anywho. So let's start with the web page. What is a web page? Well, a web page is simply, to put it simply, an HTML document or hypertext markup language, which is just a file with a bunch of tags that have a semantic meaning, a specific semantic meaning to the browser. Basically, think of it as just a text file which is formatted in a very specific way. And if it has the correct formatting, the browser can actually understand you can express certain commands, if you will, to the browser. And that allows you to build up a web page, such as Facebook and like these, Google's web page and so forth. That's in essence what it is. And all the styling and all that stuff comes from different technologies, such as CSS and JavaScript and all that good stuff. So web pages, or HTML and so forth, are designed to allow you to provide a graphical interface, a user interface, to anybody using a browser. That's the idea anyway. And that's probably the way that you are accustomed to working with the web. Now, the difference here between like an HTML page or a web page and an API, hopefully it will become clear, because now you're gonna have to keep up with me. An API, in general, if we just for the sake of argument, because API is this kind of loose term that a lot of people uses for a lot of different stuff, but in the context of this discussion, we're going to talk about REST APIs. And I'm not going to go too far into REST and stuff, because then it gets really technical really quickly. But the idea of an API is that when you need some data, regardless of who wants that data, you will get the data and not any styling or anything like that. You just get the raw information. Because when you're visiting a web page, for the most part, you provide some type of text information or information to the page, because otherwise people generally, why would they visit your page if there's no information? So when you visit a web page, you get HTML, CSS, all that stuff that makes up a graphical interface. The web page is designed for a human reader. But an API is designed to be more universal. It doesn't give you any type of styling, no CSS, no HTML. It's usually JSON or XML, which are data formats basically for information. They just give you the raw information. So imagine if, let's say, you're on Twitter, you go to your feed, right? You see a web page with all of the different posts in your Twitter feed. But if you use Twitter's API, all you get is the text and the information that are inside those, is inside of your flow. That's it. Now you may ask, why would I use this? Well, if you think about it, today, it used to be the case that everybody used web pages for everything. But what's nice about APIs, which is why the trend is that people are more and more building so-called data-driven applications. Well, not data-driven applications, but like if you've heard about React and using Angular and so forth, the idea is basically that your server, instead of serving up web pages willy-nilly, they have a single web page that they serve up to the user, and then they put, or rather they use JavaScript to put everything on the client side, and then you grab information using APIs. Because and the thinking here is that if you have an API driven application, you actually have the most dynamic and flexible system that you can have. Because the issue with web pages is that, what if you decide to go mobile with your system? Let's say you have an app, you build it for the web, it gets really popular, and then now you want to build a mobile device. So the problem there is that, because if the only thing you're serving up to the clients are web pages, that's not going to work, because your mobile device, mobile doesn't render web pages. That's not what it was designed to do. It just needs the data. So that's where the API comes in, because if you just have the API, you can just get the data, and then you can, on the client, decide exactly how to display it to the user. That's the thinking, and it's very future-proof. I mean, we're getting wearable devices like watches and stuff, where the interface on the watch is extremely small, and it's the same idea. If the watch just can grab the data from the API, then you can have a very flexible way of displaying that information. So the reason why big companies, and it's almost standard practice to use APIs for everything, because it's the most future-proof way of structuring the system. Because clients or devices may change, but data usually stays the same. So that's why people are moving towards APIs rather than web pages. And that's where React and Angular and all that stuff comes in, because if you just serve up that JavaScript code to the client, then the rest of your system doesn't have to worry about web pages and so forth, because you already served it up, and now the rest of the interaction for the client and the server is done in the same way that mobile and whatever. There's just a bunch of endpoints where you can get some data. So what are you going to have to consider when you're building your web app, if you will? Now, what I would suggest is that you have a think about what type of experience that you want to provide, or rather what you're going to do with your application. Let's say that a classic one of mine is, I think that a lot of people are overusing like SPAs, React and Angular and so forth. You kind of just use it for the sake of using it. The issue is that sometimes it makes sense and sometimes it doesn't make so much sense. If you think about long-term stuff, like if you want to build an application that you perceive as being very quickly becoming something very popular and that you need to be able to scale to mobile devices, yes, of course you should do that. If your goal is to create a system that should run on Android, iOS and web at the same time, and you have the type of capacity and you have the development power to do that, then yes, you should build an API. But if your idea is to just build for one platform to start off with, let's say that you wanted to just make a web page to start off with, which is, in my opinion, probably the best way to go. Don't go too big too early. So let's say that you're just doing web. Then there's no reason for you to build, unless, as I said, unless you have a very specific reason why you want to make it an SPA. If it's just a standard web page, don't get too fancy with APIs and so forth. Start off by just making a web page, make that work, make it a good experience, and then transition into API-driven applications. And that's to give you something concrete. If you are making a really, really complicated application, such as Google Mail, for example, or Facebook's dashboard panels, where there's a lot of dynamic stuff going on, a lot of JavaScript and so forth, then it makes sense for you to use React and Angular and so forth. But if you're making a very simple web shop or something where there's not really that much need, you're really only displaying information and images and stuff like that, then it makes, in my opinion, more sense to make a web page. So that's I know it's a fussy way of defining it, but that's probably the best way. At least that's the way I think about things. And if we're going to say something about it, the future and most likely thing to happen going forward is that APIs will have a bigger and bigger importance in the IT world. But that doesn't mean that you should just not ignore when to build an API and when to build a web page. You should build the right thing for your use case. But in general, APIs are the way to go.